Hello, everyone, and welcome to PRO Talks, the podcast that we produce regularly here at the PR office out of Farringdon. I'm very pleased today to have Neil Ross with me from techUK to discuss the Labour Party's approach to tech policy and startup investment policy. So welcome to the podcast, Neil.
Thanks for having me, Gabriel.
Just before we go into sort of the nitty-gritty detail, do you just want to talk about techUK and what you do with your team at the company?
Yeah, absolutely. For any listeners who haven't heard of techUK before, techUK is the trade association for the technology sector in the UK. So a bit like, if you don't know what a trade association is, think about, the kind of Royal College of Nurses, but for tech companies. We've got a broad base of members. We represent 1,000 tech companies that operate in the UK. And we provide a kind of number of services, networking with your peers, understanding the kind of direction of markets and industry. But as Associate Director for Policy, what I do is I work in our policy and public affairs team and basically make sure that the tech sector puts its best foot forward when it comes to engaging with the government, with politicians, regulators, and kind of all your kind of government and policy stakeholders. So spend a lot of time thinking about, what does the government think about tech? How is the debate changing in the Labour Party? And various other different areas.
Thank you. So you're the perfect guest for what we want to discuss. So to kick us off, obviously there's been a Tory government now for 13 years. There has been a big drive in terms of tech in the last couple of years, with 5 priority areas being around AI, quantum, semiconductors, sort of 5G and biotech, with all these sort of strategies coming out tied to investments and priorities to varying levels of success and applauds from the various industries. So we won't focus on that today, but it would be interesting to hear from you about Labour's priorities. Do you think they'll also focus on these specific areas, or what are sort of the headline differences in their approach to the tech space?
Yeah, so I think the first place to kind of start off with is we're quite lucky in the UK because we have quite a pro-tech government. You look at Rishi Sunak, Michelle Donlan, the Secretary of State for the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, and Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor. And these people are big advocates for the industry. They really believe that the tech sector is where the kind of future of the UK economy is going. And you look at the kind of 5 priority technology areas they've set out, whether it's semiconductors, 5G, 6G, or AI. The combining theme between those is that they see these as cross-cutting technologies which are going to benefit the UK economy in the long run, and they want to kind of set out long-term strategies for them. That's not the end of their tech ambition, but that's the areas they feel they really need to focus on. Equally, while we have a very pro-tech government, we're starting to see a much more pro-tech Labour Party, particularly after the recent reshuffle that happened and the appointment of Peter Kyle as the new Shadow Secretary of State for the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. Now, Labour, if it comes into government, it's still going to be pro-tech, but it's probably going to slightly change the terms of engagement rather than the overall direction. And that is that Labour looks at technology as more like tech for a purpose. You might have seen that Keir Starmer set out these 5 missions. Now, it looks a bit like a political slogan, but when you speak to people who work in the Labour Party, those 5 missions are actually the things that they think will really drive the aims and objectives of a Labour government. And the 5 missions include things like achieving the fastest growth in the G7 economic growth, making sure that the NHS is fit for the future, reforming public services like education and the criminal justice system, and also investing in green technologies. And what Labour often says is tech and the digital sector is the glue that will hold those 5 missions together and are absolutely vital for kind of underpinning their success. So we're going to get potentially a pro-tech Labour government, but they're going to look at it from a potentially quite different way to the Conservative government we have now.
Just a bit of a pointed question, I guess, because what the Labour Party will want to portray in general, as you say, with the reshuffle and at party conference coming up, is that they are now the party of business. If you're a company, if you're a tech company, if you're a CEO, you'll want to talk to Rachel Reeves and the Shadow team rather than people that are currently at D6 because they're on their way out. That will be the narrative. Do you think that this is accurate, that the Labour Party is now a party for business, or is there still a way to go from your perspective, speaking to a lot of these companies and executives?
Labour definitely has really pushed hard to kind of seize that mantle of the party for business. And look, obviously, as political parties rise in the polls and it looks more likely that they're going to form the next government, businesses are really interested in engaging with them. But Labour's been doing this work for quite a long time. And the reason they've been doing that is the government has given them quite a lot of space in which to do that. When we speak to our members, and we did a big report recently called our UK Tech Plan, focusing on how the next government could use technology to build a better Britain. One of the key bits of feedback our members gave to us when we were researching this plan was, the government hasn't for a long time had a long-term strategy when it comes to technology. And because of the various changes in ministers and prime ministers and the disruption of the Brexit referendum, there's been a real lack of focus on policy delivery. And that's where Labour in particular has really exploited the gap the government's given them, because Labour, the way it's constructed, the strength of the leadership is they can give you those kind of quite long-term reassurances quite easily. So Labour has the political space to say, yeah, we're going to make Brexit work. We're going to make sure it's easy for you to trade. We're not going to kind of diverge for divergence's sake. And we're going to have a sensible relationship with Europe. That's something that the Tory party still has to deal with internally and can't just have that simple, clean message to businesses. Labour on the other side has really embraced this concept of an industrial strategy, whereas on the Conservative side, because of the change in the party and the government, you've had like a number of different growth strategies. So if you're a business looking at the Labour Party, which is now like come and talk to us, engage with us, you also see a party that has a very strong leadership at the core that's setting out some very simple messages on stability, continuity and long-term planning, which to use a business looks quite good given what's happened over the past 3 years.
Just to go to your point there about the Labour Party being unified, so obviously sort of generally across the board, I guess it's quite clear that Keir Starmer and his team have a very tight grip of the party and it's all very tightly communicated. But are there any issues in the tech area where there are clear divisions within the Labour Party? What are those? Will we see any of that at conference? Or do you think that the team involved in all these policy areas really have that tight of a grip, as they'll obviously want to communicate that they do?
One of Keir Starmer's big projects when he took over the Labour Party was to effectively try and make the Labour Party electable again by dealing with many of the issues they had at the end of the last leadership around anti-Semitism, and then moving on to kind of clean up the Labour Party and make it look like it's the kind of a party ready for government. And that's given him an enormous amount of control over the party. And I don't think at conference we're likely to see many kind of big bust-ups because they have organised themselves very, very well. However, there's still quite a lot for Labour to do to kind of set out a message for businesses that they can properly get engaged in. To put it quite simply, businesses have got the right vibes from the Labour Party so far, but they do need to see the detail. And that's one area where Labour hasn't yet kind of come forward with a really comprehensive plan for government. So if you look at the most public documents Labour has on its policy platform, which is the conclusions of the National Policy Forum, which sounds very techie and political, but actually it's the kind of the broad basket from which Labour will draw its policy ideas. There's not really a lot in there for tech. It's very general. And the other areas of policy that Labour is focusing on, like education, energy, and public service reform, are much more advanced. So we're still waiting to see a bit more detail from them.
Are there any sort of areas or specific policies where you sense that there is some particular worry or sort of itchiness to get, that level of detail? Or do you still sense, speaking to businesses, that, they still feel relatively calm about it? Is there anything you think is like, when someone meets with the shadow team at conference, like what will be their first few things wanting to hear about?
I think this is going to be the potentially where the conversation moves, is people that say, I've got the right vibes from the Labour Party, but now they'll be like pushing them a lot more for what are you actually going to do in government. Now there are a couple of tensions there, which is because of the kind of tight financial situation and the economic situation in the UK, the Labour Party won't want to spell out its detailed plans until we're very close to an election, just because that's when you get, as an opposition party, all the detail over tax and spend, how the economy is going to look. And Rachel Reeves is being very careful to make sure she doesn't make unfunded spending commitments. So I think lots of the policy will get decided quite close to the finish line. And it means that when businesses go and speak to Labour politicians, try and come with you with some ideas about what you think should be done and how they think they should be focusing, because they're still in listening and kind of and policy development mode. There are a couple of areas which looks like there might be some arguments within the kind of Labour Party and its stakeholders as we get close to the election. You've got to remember that the Labour Party is the party of trade unions and very proud to be the kind of workers' voice. And there's a lot of demands that some of the trade unions, like the Trade Union Congress and others, are saying about the use of technology in the workplace after the election, and they'll be pushing Labour quite hard to include that in an employment bill that's likely to be one of the first major bits of legislation Labour puts forward. Now, that's not to say that these provisions will be anti-business, but there's going to be a discussion within Labour and between the business community and the trade unions about what those should look like. And we at techUK are already doing a lot of work with the TUC and others to try and iron out what those differences might look like. So techUK recently joined an advisory task force set up by the TUC to look at issues around AI and work. And we want to engage in that discussion as soon as we possibly can, because we think that's what will inform the best policy possible for both the Labour Party, but also the trade unions and for the business community.
I thought we move on to now discuss the more financy part. So you've already touched obviously on the difficult situation at the moment, especially with making spending commitments. But obviously the blood of tech is financing and growing and making sure that companies have a route to growth inside of the UK, and that involves the investment community, the VC community, and they obviously have very specific regulations and asks that will be different from the tech companies themselves. What can you say about policies pertaining to them, and is there anything that you'd pull out specifically about Labour's approach to this?
At techUK, we work with a load of VCs and investment firms, as well as a kind of startup and scale-up community. We've got lots of scaling companies in our membership. So this is an issue that's not just important to investors and financiers themselves, but also hugely important to the tech sector. The interesting thing about this issue is there's a lot of policy consensus among the business community, but also among politicians, right? Most people have concluded that the solution to continuing to drive up investment is got to unlock more investment from institutional investors like pension funds. How can we consolidate the UK fund landscape, making EIS and SIS permanent, or SEIS and EIS permanent, raising the values on those, and also looking at lifting things like the pension charge cap to drive more investment. The interesting thing is Labour supports those policies as well. So if you look recently, Rachel Reeves published something called the Startup Scale-Up Review, which basically touched on a lot of these issues and committed Labour to looking at these while in government. So the investor community should be going to Labour and saying, everyone's identified the levers we need to pull. You just need to get on with it and pull it when you're in government. Because one of the things Labour will be really keen to do, and it will help them with their wider programme, is if we get more economic growth, increase our tax receipts, and that means Labour can try and spend money on the economic and social programmes it wants to invest in, to make the country a better place, to deliver for its communities. So that's a great way of going into Labour and saying, help us help you, or help us help you, and we can kind of get down on that. The one thing I would say, Labour is very focused on a people and place approach to economic growth. They will want to know how, as this capital is being deployed, as we're thinking about scaling up the country, that we can get this kind of investment into towns and cities outside London in the southeast, how you can deliver finance to underrepresented groups in the VC community, so particularly people from Black and ethnic minority backgrounds, and also to women founders. So coming forward with those kind of ideas as well will be something that Labour will be really keen to hear. And if you do that, focusing on how can we help you help us, how can we boost the economy, and how can we make sure that we have a more inclusive tech startup community, then you'll be working very much with Labour as it comes into government.
What about sort of attack lines? So obviously, as you say, the Labour Party is being very careful to not make any sort of out there promises. They're aligned very much with a lot of what the government is doing, because, as you say, that's also aligned with what businesses want. And it will be a bit shocking, I guess, if tech policy becomes a top thing in the elections going forward. But what's the government's response to the Labour Party doing rather well with engaging with the tech sector on this? Are there any things that they will look to target in the campaign, or that they're criticising Labour for? Or are they also just trying to neutralise this by, creating this sense of consensus for business?
Look, I don't think tech is likely to be a kind of doorstep political issue. If you think about what people are asking themselves in the 3 by-elections we've got going on at the moment, so in Tamworth, Mid Bedfordshire, and in Rutherglen and Hamilton West, the big focus is on the kind of cost of living crisis. It may also be on things like immigration and also, the state of the health service and issues around crime and criminal justice. So tech is unlikely to be a doorstep issue. So it hopefully means for businesses, you might see a level of consensus between the new parties, both parties, helping kind of, with business investment. But definitely one thing that will be key to Labour is looking at how technology and the digital economy can deliver on their 5 missions. So that is the best way of kind of getting in and saying, we want to work with you to deliver on your missions, and here's what we need to help you to do that.
Going back to the reason we're talking about this now, which is conference coming up. I know techUK will be there. What are you looking forward to the most, sort of covering this area at conference? Are there any specific topic areas that you're seeing with the program is going to dominate? Anything that you think people listening to this or people in the tech community should look out for in particular?
People listening to the podcast may be aware that there's going to be a AI Safety Summit in the UK on the 1st and 2nd of November. And when it comes to tech and party conferences this year, it is all about AI. That's what most events will be focusing on. It'll be brought up whenever tech is mentioned at any other kind of fringe event. So I think the thing I'm most interested to see, particularly from the Conservative Party conference, is the additional information we get about how the government is actually thinking about the regulation of artificial intelligence technologies and what this AI Safety Summit might deliver. So people will want to keep an eye out on Michelle Donlan, who is going to be doing a lot of events on both the Monday and the Tuesday of conference, some with techUK, which we'll be excited to see her at. But also her speech is going to be on the Tuesday as well, so that's what people should be putting in their diaries. When it comes to the Labour Party conference, I think the big thing we all want to watch out for is Peter Kyle's speech, so the new Shadow Secretary of State for the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, because I think we could see a quite different narrative being put out from the Labour Party, a more pro-tech narrative, a more how can we use tech to deliver on our 5 missions narrative coming forward, and that'll give businesses a good sense of how to and what to engage the Labour Party on as we get towards the next election. If anyone is at party conferences, techUK is running a full set of events. It's called a Tech Tuesday, so you're more than welcome to drop in and join us for a discussion.
Yeah, you definitely should. And I'll be in Liverpool for the Labour one as well for PRO. So there's definitely, for anyone listening who will be there, lots going on and connections to be made. Great. So thank you so much, Neil, for coming on the podcast. Very much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you very much.
To our listeners, thank you for tuning in, and we'll be back soon with more content about tech policy and more. Thank you.